Hi, welcome to Life Springs Farm. We wanted to cover some questions we've been getting on the YouTube channel, and wanted to go over them with you and try to hit some of the high points anyway. I think you have 10 questions.
Yep. Okay. So, number one, say I'm looking to start an exotic bird collection. How do I decide what birds to choose as a beginner collector bird person?
There's some of the basic ones. Usually price shows the level in which to start out with. Typically the cheaper the bird, the easier it is to propagate in captivity. If it's pheasants, I would recommend you start out with the golden pheasants or any of the variations in color, or silver pheasants, Amherst pheasants. Any of those are simple. The ducks, I would say, the wood ducks, the mandarins, even call ducks are a good place to start, just to get the basics done.
What about quail? Would that be a good option?
Quail, if you're limited in space, quail are a good option because they don't require a lot of space. Most of my quail I raise on wire bottom cages, and they do just fine.
Okay, so where would I find quality birds, and how would I even know if a breeder is reputable?
You got to do your legwork. Most of them have websites. It's an excellent idea, even if you have to travel a ways to go and visit the farms. Most of these breeders welcome guests to come in and look at their setup, and free to give you advice.
Okay, how about swap meets and auctions? I know we have swap meets that we do attend.
We go to swap meets. It's an outlet for us to meet people and introduce new people to aviculture. I wouldn't buy from swap meets unless you know the breeder, or you know the reputation. A lot of stuff that you buy at auctions and swap meets, well, you don't know if it's line bred, which is inbreeding. Brothers and sisters, some have done that for generations, and it makes them very difficult to propagate in captivity. So it's best to buy from a reputable breeder.
Okay, so I go to a swap meet. What could I find other than live animals?
I know the Michigan Game Breeders Association swap meets that we go to. There's usually a company there that brings poultry equipment to display, and that you can purchase there. And cages, boxes, nest boxes, any of that you can find at the game breeder shows and swap meets.
Okay, so you mentioned nesting boxes. Let's talk about those.
Hopefully this winter I can do a video on how I build them, but there's lots of information available on the internet. Your tree nesters all use a box similar to the wood duck box, which there's plenty of information online about those. The ground boxes are a little different. People have different opinions on those, and a lot of different things work, to be honest. I have some boxes that I've purchased from a breeder, and I've copied them and made more. I'll be making more this winter, and it's a good design that works, has ventilation, and it's a 2-compartment ground box for ducks.
Do you put any nesting material in them?
Yeah, the main thing I use for nesting material in the ground boxes is just sand. Sand with a little bit of grassy hay if you could find it. And the wood duck boxes, I think most people use the same, and that's wood shavings. Just your farm store wood shavings.
Okay, so here comes a question that we often get from YouTube viewers, and they always want to know, why do you use an incubator and hatcher, and for which species would you use them?
I use the hatcher more than I use the incubator. The incubator I use for all the pheasants and quail, of course. Duck eggs are very difficult to incubate from beginning to end in an incubator. I know some of the domestic species, guys do it and they do just fine. But I found nothing works better than the mother. And some set better than others. So I try to pull the duck eggs about a week before they hatch and finish them in the hatcher. That way they don't get imprinted on the mother and they're easier to start eating that way.
Okay, so is that cruel to take them away from their mothers? That was a question we had.
Yeah. It may seem cruel, but the survival rate for wild ducklings is not very good. It varies per species, but I would say average is probably less than 20%. So to take them away, you can improve that drastically by raising them in a brooder. And especially in a captive situation, I've used wood ducks to fully raise their young, but I've tried it with other species and most are just not that good of parents. And the little ones will wander off or something will happen to them, injury or something, they'll just get cold. They don't brood them always like they should.
Aviaries outside, in other words, for game birds and waterfowl, what design is good?
Kind of depends on what your situation is. If it's just a backyard setup and you're only going to have a few species, a small pen is fine. It's good to use a sight barrier around the bottom of the pen or sides, at least one whole side, maybe two whole sides, to give them security. So the whole thing is not wire. I try to provide some cover on at least one side. And then we have some cover in the pens too. In the springtime I'll use boughs for cover. But pheasants, the golden pheasants don't require much space. 5 by 10 aviary is big enough for a pair or two. Ducks require a little bit more space because of the pond situation, and some, like Michigan DNR, requires 5 square feet per duck of water space. So the surface area of your pond kind of tells how many ducks you can put in your aviary.
Okay. So talking about ponds, I've heard you talk about oil buildup on the ponds. Could you address that?
Oil buildup is can be a real problem with wild ducks, especially your diving ducks. The ducks have an oil gland near the tail, as most would know, and they preen themselves with that oil gland and wipe the oil on their feathers to keep them waterproof. Well, that oil gland produces a lot of oil, and it can accumulate on the surface of the water. So if you don't have circulation, fresh water coming in all the time, that oil can build up and have the opposite effect and actually ruin their waterproofing.
So I go to a swap meet or I go to a breeder and I'm transporting my birds, of course, and there's a change. Should we pinion? Should we wing clip? What do we do with our wings?
Typically, when I go to a show, I'm planning on selling birds. When I crate the birds, I'll pull the primaries on one wing. Pulling, it may seem cruel, but pulling the wing, just the end feathers on the wing, will prevent them from flying. It throws them off balance. And if a bird gets away from you, you can still catch it with a net. Plus, you don't want them introduced into a new area, a new pen, and fly up and break their necks. So you got to be careful.
Okay. Would you say this is a good hobby for children?
Yeah, I started this when I was probably about 10 years old. My first birds were ringneck pheasants, bobwhite quail, and chucker partridge. And a few years later, I worked up to my first pair of wood ducks, and I bought them. This was back in the 70s from a breeder out east, and I was living in Indiana at the time, and they were shipped through Ramtrak, a train, and I paid $15 for the pair and $35 for shipping. But I was proud of my first pair of wood ducks.
So you'd say it's a good educational thing for them?
Especially this day and age and social media, if you can detract your kids into a hobby like this instead of computer games or social media, I think it's a very healthy thing for them to do. In the price of a computer versus the price of a startup with a few pairs of birds, I think it's well worth it if you have a kid that's interested in the hobby. I think it's worth pursuing.
Okay, and the last thing I want to mention is that we are going to be at a couple of swap meets in the next couple of weeks, and if you want to mention something about that, where we're going to be and when?
Our next one is Saturday, October 9th, 8th, 9th, coming up. Starts at Saturday morning at the Kent County Fairgrounds in Lowell, Michigan. And it's one of the better swap meets in Michigan, so it's a good one to attend. It's not a real large swap meet, but it seemed to be a good crowd that comes to it. A lot of breeders in the area. So, and the week after that,
The 16th.
the week after that we'll be at Shipshewana. That one is an interesting swap meet because there's a lot of Amish there, and Shipshewana is an interesting town anyway. We'll be there the following Saturday, and that one starts, I think, 5:30 or 6 a.m.
At daybreak.
Yeah, they come even before daybreak and look at the birds with flashlights, so it's interesting.
Okay. So is there anything else you want to bring up?
I don't think so. If you have more questions, maybe we can do this again. Just leave it in the comment section, and appreciate you watching and subscribing, and hopefully we can get more videos here soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.